For example, Bowman notes include moral suasion and government investment facilities. Going to the 1990s, we saw an interesting development there. This is the second assessment report from the IPCC. In addition to 1 in 3 market-based programs and regulatory measures, we also see that they've now added voluntary agreements. And so this is a new development that largely came up in the 1990s. Also, they break out research, development, and demonstration as a separate policy instrument. In the last decade, we see this study from the Wuppertal Institute. Once again, regulatory instruments and economic or incentive-based instruments. But notice number 4, cooperation instruments. So they're now putting an emphasis on the fact that we can find mechanisms by which government and business cooperate. But notice voluntary agreements is under that category. Also notice they've broken out information instruments as a separate category, and there are subcategories to the information instruments. So quite a range of policy instruments. If you turn to the political science and public administration literature, you've got the classic work by Hood. Now the emphasis is on what authority or what power of government is being used for the different policy instruments. Contrast that to Salomon's virtually a Bible of policy instruments out of the political science community, and the emphasis is on the approach the government takes. Is it going directly for the change, or is it creating a context that encourages the change? Now, I've only gone through this very, very quickly, but what I want you to take away from this is 2 points. First, there's a lot of policy instruments here. Over 100 by my count, over 100 distinct policy instruments. That raises the question of how do we keep track of these? How do we understand the relation among them? How do we evaluate them? And so what we need is some mechanism, some framework for understanding the relation among these. We need to reshape the way we think about policy instruments from one of choosing from a menu to one of preparing an outcome. So it's really, rather than thinking of this as a menu, think of it as a cookbook. But that means we have to understand our ingredients, our tools, and our goals. How will we know that we've had a success in this policy kitchen, to push the metaphor a little too far? So what I want to do then is answer that last question, the one about how do we evaluate these, and then turn to the way we might organize our understanding of this. So when we're faced with a plethora of options, often the way we do it, and the policy instrument literature is no different, often the way we do this is to develop a list of criteria and then apply those criteria to each of our options. And that's exactly what the policy instrument literature has done. So for example, if you look at Mahoney in '76, a very early work, he identified 5 criteria for choosing among the several policy instruments that he identified. Environmental effectiveness, does it do the job we need? Economic efficiency, does it do it at the least cost? Political and administrative feasibility, compatibility with existing institutions, and application of the polluter pays principle. 25 years later, Don Fullerton developed a similar, a different analysis of the instruments, but quite a similar list of policy, evaluation criteria. And they're actually very similar to the ones from Mahoney. Now, as we look at this, we might say, well, that's a lot of criteria to apply. But unlike the policy instruments, which really have a diversity of different types, we argue that there are actually only 6 criteria in all of this. That all of these are in one way or another packed into those 6 criteria. And the 6 criteria are efficiency, effectiveness, impact on public finance, administrative costs or implementation costs, political feasibility, and legality. And interestingly, out of all of those studies that I just showed you, only one actually identified legality as a criteria for choosing policy instruments. But it turns out It's actually quite an important criteria. Now, we can further organize this beyond those 6 by recognizing that 3 of them are costs and 3 of them are constraints. So really what we're doing in policy instrument choice is once we have an environmental goal, a policy goal, we can go from that to saying, how are we going to achieve that goal? That's our first constraint, achieving the policy goal, subject to political and legal constraints at the least cost. And part of the trick is identifying what those costs are. Economists have traditionally focused on the abatement costs, but we also have to pay attention to the public finance costs and the implementation costs. And it's the sum of those 3 that we want to minimize. Now I could spend several hours just talking about this. What I really want to get out of this is that when we build our policy instrument taxonomy, when we structure our understanding, we should do it in a way that's consistent with the evaluation criteria that we're applying. And so the taxonomy that I'm about to show you is consistent with this policy instrument evaluation process. Now, to illustrate this as we go, I'm going to use a running example. And so I want you to imagine that you're in a small country or city, could be either one, a hypothetical country or city, and that we're concerned about these. Not the monkey, the bats. We're concerned about bats. Now, we might be concerned about these bats because we're concerned about depletion of natural resources, or we're concerned that we're filling up our landfill, we're concerned that bats litter our landscape, or we're concerned that they get into the marine environment, they damage wildlife, or injure wildlife, or even that they clog our drains and cause flooding, as happened in Bangladesh not long ago. Now, the point here is, we might be concerned about this for any number of reasons, but in the end, we have a policy. In this hypothetical city or state, let's imagine that our policy is to reduce or even eliminate the use of plastic bags for all of these environmental reasons. To do that, we need a policy instrument to go from the goal to the concrete action. And so the question then becomes, what policy instrument are we going to use? So we'll use this running example of plastic bags. Now let's talk about a taxonomy of environmental policy instruments to help us find those policy instruments that can help us with our policy goal. A taxonomy is basically constructed by applying a layered process of differentiation criteria, dimensions. So we separate out the policy instruments, that over 100 policy instruments. We're going to try to separate those out into different groupings that recognize how they differ on these important dimensions. And where we start with this is to say that there are 4 fundamental dimensions that we have to pay attention to. The first one is we have to identify what's the root of the problem. Why do we have a problem? Why has this environmental issue arisen in the first place? The second is, what's the fundamental role of government? The third is, who decides? Who gets to decide how we're going to change behavior? And the fourth is, who's going to pay for it? So there are lots of other dimensions lots of other dimensions that we could apply to separating out these policy instruments. But these 4 simple dimensions help us lay a foundation for a policy instrument taxonomy. So the first dimension, the root of the environmental problem, asks, why are we not addressing this problem already? Why does the government need to be involved? And the 3 reasons are, first, there are 3 basic reasons that lead us down this path. The first one is that no one has the information and technologies for action.